You're 3 years into retirement. Your budget is working. You've got your routine down. Then your daughter calls. Her husband lost his job. They're about to lose the house, and you're the only one who can help. You didn't budget for that. Or maybe it's the funeral for your college roommate. Plane tickets, hotel, meals, 3 days away. You didn't budget for that either. Every month there's something. The dental crown that insurance doesn't cover. The wedding gift for your nephew. The property tax increase you forgot to account for. You're not overspending. You're just discovering that retirement has a whole category of costs that never made it into your spreadsheet. My name is David Harrington. I spent over 2 decades as an investment banking analyst and portfolio strategist, navigating market cycles, recessions, and financial bubbles. After stepping away from institutional finance, I now focus on helping everyday people, especially those approaching or enjoying retirement, understand money in a calm, practical way. Before we continue, a quick note. This isn't financial advice. Everyone's situation is different. Think of this as education to help you ask better questions and make calmer decisions. If you find this helpful, please subscribe and hit the like button. It helps more people find content like this. And turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. By the end of this video, you'll understand the expenses that blindside most retirees. Not because they're irresponsible, but because these costs don't fit neatly into monthly budgets. You'll know what to watch for and how to create breathing room for the expenses nobody talks about. Most retirement planning focuses on the big three: housing, healthcare, and food. Those are important. But here's what I learned watching hundreds of retirements over 2 decades. The expenses that destroy peace of mind aren't usually the big, predictable ones. They're the ones that appear every few months, cost anywhere from $500 to $5,000, and don't fit any category in your budget spreadsheet. Let me show you what this means in real life. You budget for your routine dental cleanings. You don't budget for the crown that suddenly cracks on a Friday evening. You budget for your annual physical. You don't budget for the dermatologist who finds something concerning and wants to see you every 3 months, with copays adding up to $800 you weren't expecting. You budget for your regular prescriptions. You don't budget for the specialist who prescribes something new that your insurance considers not medically necessary and costs $240 a month out of pocket. These aren't failures of planning. They're the reality of life showing up in ways that spreadsheets can't predict. Here's where it gets interesting. Most financial advisors will tell you to build an emergency fund. That's good advice. But what they call emergencies and what actually happens in retirement are 2 different things. The furnace dying, that's an emergency. But what about the wedding in Seattle when you live in Florida? What about your grandson's graduation when you promised you'd be there? What about the friend's milestone birthday dinner that costs $200 once you factor in the gift and the restaurant? Those aren't emergencies, but they're also not optional if you want to maintain the relationships and experiences that make retirement worth having. Think about it this way. In your working years, you had a regular income, bonuses, overtime, tax refunds, selling things you didn't need anymore. When unexpected expenses showed up, you had multiple ways to absorb them. In retirement, your income is fixed. Social Security doesn't give bonuses. Your pension doesn't have overtime. The stock market doesn't care that you need an extra $1,000 this month. Every dollar that goes out has to come from somewhere specific, and that somewhere is usually your carefully calculated withdrawal plan. Now here's what I found surprising after leaving Wall Street. The financial industry treats retirement like it's steady state. You retire, you have X dollars, you withdraw Y% each year, and the math works out perfectly over 30 years. But real retirement isn't steady state. It's dynamic. The first 5 years, you're healthy and active. You travel more, you spend more, you're enjoying the freedom you worked 40 years to get. Years 5 through 15, things settle down. Maybe health issues appear. Maybe you're less interested in traveling. Your spending actually drops. Then somewhere around year 15 or 20, healthcare costs start climbing. Maybe you need more help around the house. Maybe long-term care becomes part of the conversation. Each phase has its own expense profile, and almost none of it matches the smooth withdrawal rate your retirement calculator assumed. Let me give you a real example of what this looks like. A couple I knew retired at 65 with what looked like a solid plan. Their advisor had them withdrawing 4% a year. The math worked beautifully on paper. But in year 2, their son went through a brutal divorce. They helped with legal fees, $12,000 they hadn't planned on. In year 3, Their roof needed replacing. Insurance covered some, but they were out $9,000. In year 4, they took their entire family on a cruise to celebrate their 40th anniversary, another $8,000. In year 5, one of them needed cataract surgery on both eyes. Even with Medicare, they paid $4,000 out of pocket. That's $33,000 in 5 years that never appeared in any budget category. Not emergencies, exactly. Not luxuries either. Just life showing up with a bill. What surprised me most wasn't that these expenses happened. It's that they happened to everyone. Every single retiree I worked with had some version of this story. The specifics changed. Sometimes it was helping adult children. Sometimes it was home repairs. Sometimes it was medical expenses that insurance didn't fully cover. But the pattern was identical. Every year brought 3 to 6 expenses between $500 and $5,000 that weren't in the budget. You might be wondering how most people handle this. They adjust. They cut back somewhere else. They skip the vacation they were planning. They say no to helping their grandkids with college. They stress about every unexpected expense because each one feels like it's threatening the whole plan. That's not a way to live in retirement. You didn't work 40 years to spend your retirement worrying about whether you can afford your friend's birthday dinner. Here's what actually works. You need a category in your budget called Life Happens, not emergencies, not discretionary spending. A specific allocation for the predictable reality that unpredictable expenses will show up 3 to 6 times a year. For most retirees, this means setting aside somewhere between $3,000 and $8,000 annually, about $250 to $650 a month, for expenses that don't fit anywhere else. That sounds like a lot. But think about what you're getting. You're getting the ability to help your daughter when she needs it without derailing your whole year. You're getting to attend the funeral without calculating whether you can afford the plane ticket. You're getting to say yes to experiences that matter without constantly checking your balance. You're getting peace of mind, which is what retirement is supposed to provide. Let me show you what this means with actual numbers. If you're withdrawing $40,000 a year from your retirement savings, you might have budgeted at something like this. $15,000 for housing, $8,000 for healthcare, $6,000 for food, $4,000 for utilities and insurance, $3,000 for transportation, and $4,000 for everything else. That everything else is where you're supposed to fit travel, entertainment, gifts, and all those unpredictable expenses we've been discussing. It doesn't work. What works better is this. Take that $4,000 everything else and split it differently. $2,000 goes to planned discretionary spending, the things you know you want to do. $2,000 goes to your Life Happens fund. Then you add another $4,000 to that fund from your withdrawal, bringing it to $6,000 annually. Yes, that means increasing your total withdrawal by $4,000 a year. But here's the reality. You were going to spend it anyway. You just spend it in a way that created stress instead of peace of mind. Now here's something most people miss. This isn't about having more money. It's about being honest about what retirement actually costs. Every retirement calculator asks you to estimate your annual expenses. Most people lowball this number because they're thinking about their regular monthly bills. They forget about the dental work, the property tax increases, the wedding gifts, the unexpected travel, the home repairs, the medical expenses insurance doesn't cover. They end up with a plan that looks perfect on paper and falls apart in contact with reality. Let me tell you what I wish someone had told me when I was still working in institutional finance. The difference between a retirement that works and one that creates constant anxiety isn't usually the big numbers. It's not about whether you have 1.2 million or 1.5 million saved. It's about whether you've built enough flexibility into your plan to handle the expenses that don't fit categories. It's about whether you can absorb a $5,000 surprise without questioning whether you'll run out of money at 85. Here's the hard truth. If your retirement plan has no margin for error, no room for life to happen, no flexibility for the unpredictable, then you don't actually have a retirement plan. You have a spreadsheet that will start lying to you the moment reality shows up. Think about what retirement actually is. It's 30 years of life, 30 years of birthdays and weddings and funerals, 30 years of things breaking and needing replacement, 30 years of medical care that will get more expensive and more frequent, 30 years of wanting to help people you love, 30 years of experiences you don't want to miss. You can't budget for all of that with precision, but you can build a plan that's honest about the fact that it will happen. Now let's talk about the expenses that really blindside people. We've covered the 3 to 6 times a year surprises. But there's another category that destroys retirement budgets: the big, irregular expenses that happen every few years. Replacing your car, a major home repair, the roof, the HVAC, the water heater, new appliances when the old ones finally die, helping adult children with major expenses. These don't happen every year, but when they do, they're not $5,000. They're $15,000 or $25,000 or more. Here's what I saw happen repeatedly. People would plan for their regular expenses. They might even have an emergency fund for the unexpected. But then year 7 of retirement, they need a new car. 15 years of retirement, the roof needs replacing. 20 years in, major dental work that's been put off for years finally becomes unavoidable. Each of these events costs more than 1 year's worth of discretionary spending. And each one creates a crisis because it wasn't part of the plan. The financial industry has a solution for this. They call it bucketing or time segmentation, or half a dozen other names. The basic idea is you set aside money in different accounts for different time horizons. Your immediate spending comes from safe, liquid accounts. Your 5 to 10-year money is in moderate investments. Your long-term money is more aggressive. It's not a bad framework. But here's what they don't emphasize. One of those buckets needs to be for the big, irregular expenses that you know are coming but can't predict exactly when. Let me put this simply. If you own a home, you're going to have major repairs. If you drive a car, you're going to need to replace it eventually. If you have teeth, you're going to need dental work. If you live long enough, you're going to need help around the house that you can do yourself right now. These aren't possibilities. They're certainties. The only uncertainty is timing and exact cost. What works in real life is setting aside money specifically for these predictable but irregular expenses. For most retirees, this means having $25,000 to $50,000 in relatively safe, accessible investments earmarked for big expenses in the next 5 to 10 years. Not your emergency fund. That's for true emergencies. Not your regular spending money. That's for monthly bills. A separate allocation for the expenses you know are coming but can't schedule. Here's what this actually prevents. You're 72 years old. Your car is 12 years old and starting to have issues. You could keep nursing it along, spending $1,500 here, $1,000 there on repairs. Or you could replace it now while you can still drive and make good decisions. But replacing it means $28,000 you weren't planning to spend this year. If that money has to come from selling investments in a down market, or if it means blowing through your emergency fund, or if it creates anxiety about whether you can afford it, then you're going to make a bad decision. You'll either keep the unreliable car and stress every time it makes a new noise, or you'll buy the new car and stress about the money. But if you've got $30,000 set aside specifically for this type of expense, money that you've been planning to use for exactly this purpose, then it's just a decision, not a crisis, not a source of anxiety, just a normal part of life and retirement. You see where I'm going with this. Retirement planning isn't really about calculating the perfect withdrawal rate. It's about building enough flexibility into your financial life that normal expenses don't create abnormal stress. It's about being honest with yourself about what life actually costs when you're living it for 30 years without a paycheck. Here's something else that surprised me. The expenses that hurt most aren't usually the ones you spend on yourself. They're the ones you spend on other people. Your daughter needs help. Your grandson wants to go to a summer program that would be life-changing but costs $3,000. Your best friend is turning 75 and everyone's chipping in for a special gift. Your church is raising money for a project you believe in. These aren't in anyone's retirement budget, but saying no to all of them means missing out on some of the most meaningful parts of retirement. What I learned from people who handled this well, they built generosity into their budget as its own category. Not huge amounts, maybe $100 or $200 a month, sometimes more if they could afford it, but a specific allocation that let them say yes when opportunities to help or participate came up without derailing their whole financial plan. The people who didn't do this spent retirement either saying no to everything, which isolated them and made retirement feel restricted, or saying yes to everything and watching their money disappear faster than planned. Let me show you what happens when you ignore all this. You retire with a plan that looks perfect. Your advisor shows you the projections. Your money lasts until you're 95 with money left over. You feel confident. Then reality starts. Year 1, a few unexpected expenses. You adjust. Year 2, some bigger surprises. You cut back on discretionary spending. Year 3, a major expense hits. Now you're starting to worry. By year 5, you're living more carefully than you planned, avoiding expenses you can actually afford because you've lost confidence in the numbers. By year 10, you're making decisions based on fear rather than reality. That's not the retirement you worked for. Now here's the good news. This is fixable, even if you're already retired. It starts with getting honest about what you've actually been spending, not what your budget says you should spend. Go back through the last year or two. Add up everything. The predictable and the unpredictable. The planned and the surprise. The regular and the irregular. That's your real number. That's what retirement actually costs you. Then take that real number and build in some room. Add 10 to 15% for expenses you haven't encountered yet, but will. Add another allocation for the big, irregular expenses, the car replacement, the major home repairs, the dental work. Add something for generosity and helping others if that's important to you. That's your honest retirement budget. Yes, it's higher than what the calculators said, but it's also real, which means you can actually plan around it. Here's what this might mean practically. Maybe you thought you could retire on 3% withdrawals from your portfolio, but when you account for all these real expenses, you need 4% or even 4.5%. That's okay. The question isn't whether you're withdrawing more than some theoretical ideal. The question is whether your money will last as long as you need it to, given what life actually costs. Sometimes that means working another year or two. Sometimes it means adjusting your expectations about discretionary spending. Sometimes it means having an honest conversation with your advisor about what's actually sustainable. What doesn't work is pretending these expenses don't exist or hoping they won't happen to you. They will. They happen to everyone. The only question is whether you've planned for them or whether each one arrives as a crisis. Think about it this way. You can have a retirement plan that looks perfect on paper but creates constant stress in reality. Or you can have a plan that's messier on paper but actually works when life happens. Most people would choose the second option if they understood the trade-off. But the financial industry keeps selling the first one because it's easier to model and sounds more reassuring. Here's what I tell people now. A good retirement plan isn't the one with the highest projected balance at death. It's the one that lets you sleep at night when the car breaks down, say yes when your daughter needs help, attend the funeral without calculating plane ticket costs, and replace the water heater without questioning your whole financial future. That requires building in more flexibility than most retirement calculators suggest. But it's the difference between retiring from work and actually enjoying retirement. Let me give you one more example of what this looks like in practice. I knew a couple who retired at 67 with about $800,000 in savings. Not a huge amount, but not nothing either. Their advisor had them on a 3.5% withdrawal, $28,000 a year plus their Social Security. The projections looked solid, but they kept having these unexpected expenses. Every quarter, something came up. Sometimes small, sometimes bigger. They were constantly stressed, constantly recalculating, constantly wondering if they'd made a mistake retiring. Finally, they sat down and tracked everything for a full year. Regular expenses, about $32,000 once you added up everything, including the surprises. Plus, they wanted to be able to help their kids occasionally and travel to see grandchildren. Realistically, they needed about $40,000 a year from their savings, not 28. That's a 5% withdrawal rate. Their advisor wasn't happy about it. But here's what happened. Their stress level dropped immediately. They stopped agonizing over every expense. They started enjoying retirement. And you know what? Their portfolio still grew over the next 5 years because the market did well. The safe withdrawal rate almost caused them to miss retirement entirely. I'm not saying everyone should withdraw 5%. I'm saying the right withdrawal rate is the one that lets you live the retirement you planned for without constant anxiety. Sometimes that's 3%. Sometimes it's 5%. It depends on your specific situation, your sources of income, your health, your family situation, all of it. But whatever it is, it needs to account for the real expenses of retirement, not just the theoretical ones. Here's the thing about all these hidden expenses. They're only hidden if you're not looking for them. Once you know to expect them, you can plan for them. Once you plan for them, they stop being crises and become just normal parts of life. That shift from constant crisis to normal life is what makes retirement actually enjoyable. So what's the practical takeaway? First, track your actual spending for at least a year if you're already retired. If you're not retired yet, inflate your estimated expenses by at least 15% to account for what you're missing. Second, create specific allocations for irregular expenses. both the frequent smaller ones and the occasional big ones. Third, build in some room for generosity and helping others if that matters to you. Fourth, be honest with yourself and your advisor about what retirement actually costs you, not what the calculators say it should cost. Most importantly, remember that the goal isn't to have the most efficient retirement plan on paper. The goal is to have a retirement that works in reality. That means planning for the expenses nobody talks about, but everyone experiences. It means building in more flexibility than feels comfortable on a spreadsheet. It means accepting that retirement costs more than you thought, and that's okay as long as you're honest about it. Your future self, the one dealing with the unexpected expense that just showed up, is counting on you to build this flexibility in now. Don't wait until you're 3 years into retirement and already stressed. Build a plan that can handle reality from day one. That's what I wish someone had told me before I started helping people retire. The math is important, but the psychology is more important. And the psychology works better when your plan acknowledges that life happens, expenses appear, and flexibility matters more than precision. Think about what that means for your retirement. Think about building a plan that can handle the expenses you haven't predicted yet, but will definitely encounter. Your peace of mind depends on it.